Oh, Phil.
Good evening, JR.
How you doing, bud?
So you got that jacket on.
Yep. It's not too hot today. A little bit chilly. Not too bad
Yeah.
though. It's not raining anyway.
JR, today we're looking in the fifth session of, we're looking into Jesus's miracles, his signs, they
Yep.
call it, in John. Fellow that wrote this section, commentary on this study, said his family's jolted awake by tornado sirens years ago, and they all got up and they hid in the bathroom, which is, an interior bathroom's
Right.
sometimes the safest place
Right.
if you don't have a basement. And he heard a loud rumble overhead, and boy, they didn't know what they were going to see when they went outside. And it passed them, but it caused significant damage in the neighborhood. Tore up a bunch of houses
Yeah.
and trees and things. Imagine the disciples. They're in this little small boat, about 27 foot long, out on the middle of this lake,
Yeah.
13 miles by 8 miles. And, the wind gets whipping across there. It gives some pretty good waves. And that's where we find these guys. They're out there in peril in the middle of a storm. Sometimes everybody feels that way, I guess, when they're alone or they're in a dangerous situation in an unfamiliar place. I remember when I was in Nashville, I was going to school and I was just on edge all the time.
Yeah.
I felt like I was sitting right on the top of a fence.
Could fall either way.
And I just had to be on my watch with my head on swivel all the time. The greatest comfort we get is knowing that Jesus walks with us when we're in those situations. Jesus was with the disciples. When he dismissed this massive crowd, we talked about in last week's study in the feeding of the 5,000, the people tried to follow him. They
Yeah,
continued to try to follow him. And they wanted to see another miracle, or they had their own thing
Had a
that
sickness
they
or something. Yeah.
wanted him to fix special, and some of them were wanting to chase him down, make him king.
Yeah.
So they had that in their minds. They thought, well, if Jesus can feed that many people on a few pieces of bread and fish, he is going to be the
He
one
needs to
that
be.
lead us out from this Roman rule and restore Israel. But Jesus wanted to get away by himself.
Yep.
Like that commercial. You want to get away? He wanted to get away by himself
Yeah.
and pray with his Father. So there's a lot going on. News, it had that big meeting there with the 5,000. News of John the Baptist's death still hung. Reports of the disciples from their time away. They'd come back in there and they were sharing things that they met when they were out. So this miracle just occurred, and it was evening, and Jesus was with his disciples, and I think he was tired.
I think he was too.
Just wanted to be alone.
Yep.
Let's look at the scriptures. This is a good study.
Yeah, let's look at chapter 6 of John, verses 16 through 18. Start with, it says, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. Darkness had already set in, but Jesus had not yet come to them. A high wind arose, and the sea began to churn. You've laid this out pretty good. It was late in the afternoon when after the miracle with feeding the 5,000. Now Mark and Matthew both have this same story, but I believe it's Mark that tells the fact that Jesus told them to go get in the boat and go to the other side, that he would join them
It's
later.
more detailed.
Yeah, a little bit more detail than what John says, and he would join them later. And as you said, he went up in the mountains, and first off, he had to send the people away. I don't know how he ever got rid of them, but then he said, then he stayed up there and prayed a while. We don't know how long it was, but it was probably several hours, and maybe the disciples waited for him a little bit, we don't know. But they finally realized, we gotta get out of here, we gotta row this boat for 5 miles,
Yeah.
and, it's already dark.
And you know, there again, these mountains, they're not mountains like you
Right,
think
right.
of in the Rockies or something. It's
Yeah.
some hills.
Yeah.
Little
300 or
places
400
all-
higher on
yeah,
either side,
yeah.
and of course, they always said that wind would come, and of course, they were going to the west. They were rowing to the west, and of course, the way it is around here, the prevailing wind is from the southwest. And if you get a little bit of extra wind into that, and you're trying to row into it, you've got a long night ahead of you, and that's what they found. It says that when evening came, disciples got into the boat and left for Capernaum. And as I said, it was probably about less than 5 miles because the ocean, the sea was 8 miles wide, but they probably weren't going across the whole width if they were coming
Right.
around the corner of it,
Yeah.
probably. And the disciples were probably looking for a familiar place to spend the night. We don't know how long they've been on the road, Phil. I'm sure there wasn't many nights that they were able to even be close to where they were. And Matthew talks, or Mark recorded that Philip, Andrew, and Peter were from the town of Bethsaida, which is about 2 miles from Capernaum. Not very far at all. They were just, when you get on the shore there, you're home almost, if you walk 2 miles. And I think they probably wanted to spend a night in a familiar place. Might get some of Mama's cooking.
Yeah.
As we know Peter's mother-in-law lived in Capernaum, and they were excited to go home to get to their house. They left when they left after darkness had already set in. Of course, they didn't have running lights on the boat. They didn't.
Yeah, and you know when you're on a boat in the dark, I've been out there when that cloud cover comes in, you're kind of guiding by the lights on the shoreline.
So they
Well,
didn't
if
have
there's no
lights on the
lights on the shoreline,
Yeah,
what do you do?
they didn't have any lights on the shore. Yeah, you're exactly right. You can't tell nowadays. And if you go outside in my house in E-Town, and there's light everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, you're a little bit different than we are. You're probably pretty dark out there in your area, but you still
In
see a
areas.
night light here and there.
Yeah.
You know where the road is and so forth and so on. Well, they didn't have anything. And it says that Jesus had not yet come to them. He was probably still up on the mountain, probably, as you said, spending time alone with God, praying to God for leadership and guidance in his life. Then it said a high wind came up. Now, we don't know if it was a storm or a high wind or whatever it was. It caused the seawater to begin to churn.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a 25-mile-an-hour wind or something that was whipping up some whitecaps. It was rolling
Yeah.
the water. And
Yeah, usually it churns when like you have a tidal surge.
yes, yeah.
On the ocean.
Yeah.
To go along with the storm and the waves and
Yeah.
stuff, which makes it about double what it.
Yeah, exactly. It was a rough time, and they were. I'm sure they were concerned. Now, did Jesus know when he sent them off that night that there was going to be a storm?
Sure.
Probably did. Sure he did. And just like he knew whenever he asked Philip, where are you going to get the food to feed these people, did he know his solution to this storm coming
Sure,
up? He
sure.
knew exactly what was going to happen, but yet he sent them on anyway. And I think it was partly to illustrate another point of his power, and we're going to see it as we go through the lesson. Yeah, it was. They were hurting. They were. Now, one of the other ones, I believe it's Matthew, I believe it was, that talked about the fact that Jesus might have even seen them out there rolling against this wind and being buffered by the waves and so forth. But we find that they're on their own in the middle of the sea. That God, Jesus, the man of God who fed those 5,000 people, is not with them anymore. They're on their own, and don't we find ourselves in that shape sometimes? We find ourselves away from God, or not feeling the closeness of God that we do at other times, and sometimes we get in terrible condition when we do it.
It's like the soldiers used to say, said,
There's no
you
atheist.
get close to God in them foxholes.
There's no
You know,
atheist in a God.
No atheist in a foxhole.
That's
You
right.
get close to God real quick. It doesn't matter where your
Yeah.
status is. You start looking for him.
Yeah. So the next verses are gonna show us that Jesus' presence brings peace.
And after they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, it says, they saw Jesus walking on the sea. He was coming near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Now, JR, there's a lot of stuff that's going on here.
Well, Phil, they just seen him
They just
bless the
seen,
food, and it turned into bushels of food.
I know.
But is that different than somebody walking on that water?
It's a miracle, and they know it's a miracle.
Mhm.
But now they're doing something that they've done many times, probably before,
Yeah.
and they knew they were in trouble.
Yeah,
You know, even though they might have just been rowing 3 or 4 miles,
yeah,
they knew they were in trouble
Mhm.
because of the severity of this storm. And what did they do? Here they are. You see, you look up and see Jesus walking on the water. Well, people don't walk on the water.
no,
Now, Jay, we've seen stuff like this on TV.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
it wouldn't scare a kid, our kid,
yeah, no,
or grandkids, near as much as what these people have
Yeah.
been exposed to.
yeah,
They've never been exposed to anything like this.
right, right,
Either make believe or in reality. So they saw him coming across on the water. Mark records Jesus had seen the plight of his disciples and
Yeah,
determined
yeah,
that he should come to them. And Jesus came to assure that, you know, his power was greater than the storm that they were encountering or anything that they would encounter in the future. But this was a mighty wind and an angry sea. So he's attentive to their need, and he comes to them on the water. And they said they were afraid
yeah,
when he got near the boat, and they thought it was a ghost,
they thought it was a ghost.
and they probably hadn't seen a ghost either.
No,
But you know, there's certainly been tales of ghosts, but they're looking to each other, and they were afraid. The Greek word they use here is phobos, which we get phobia or fear.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
fear, hydrophobia, fear of water. You know,
Right.
Just different types of. But 5 categories: animals, natural environments such as heights or thunder, medical injury or bloodshed. You know, some people see blood, they just freak out.
yeah, yeah,
And then specific situations like flying. You know, if you have a fear of flying, some people it's riding in a car, or a fear of loud noises, or a fear of drowning if you're on the water.
that'd be me.
The disciples could have experienced at least 1 or 2 of these.
Yeah,
With this situation
Yeah.
that they
Oh,
were
yeah.
in. The wind and the waves, and then here he comes walking on the water. So the ability to do this is unknown to them. They'd never seen it before. So the fear arose in them when they saw him walking on the water. It says, the writer said they thought it was probably an imposter from the spirit world. Thinking, you know, it's somebody from the spirit world trying to act out like they're Jesus. I don't know where he gets that.
yeah,
But Jesus readily identified himself. He didn't want him to get too far gone in the head, did he?
do you think that was when they recognized who it was when he said that it is I?
I think they recognized his voice. We know Peter did.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah,
You know, he sometimes says he's a good shepherd.
mm-hmm,
My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me.
mm-hmm,
They heard that familiar, reassuring voice
mm-hmm.
of Jesus calling to them from above the storm. You gotta remember, still thunder and water,
Yeah.
raining on the water, and that makes a lot of noise. Wind blowing. In Matthew's account, he talks more about Peter.
Right, right.
Impetuous Peter, he calls him. He comes up and he says, if it's you, tell me to come walk to you on the water. And what's he do? He gets out of the boat and he starts toward him. And he's walking on the water.
Takes a few steps.
Walking on the water. But as he got fearful, as he started looking at his surroundings, he began to sink, didn't he? And Jesus chided him for his
Yeah.
loss of faith there. He let him have it a little bit. But Peter had more faith than his other disciples.
They didn't ask to go
They
out, did
didn't. They wasn't getting out of that boat in that storm. They stayed in the boat. So we remember Peter for his courage and his faith and his boisterous
Yeah, yeah.
way of communicating.
I think he said, if it's you, bring him, let me come to me.
Yeah, let me come to you on the water.
Yeah. Jesus said, come on, big boy.
It said, don't be afraid.
Mhm.
Why? He knew they was afraid, didn't he? Fear, the writer says here, fear is the possession of our common humanity. And Scripture exhorts hundreds of times where it tells us not to fear, not to give in to our fear. Fear not, hundreds of times throughout the Bible. Abraham troubled about having no heir. He was afraid that he wasn't going to see a
Right.
child. Moses, think of the times that he was fearful. And then Joshua, whole first chapter of Joshua is do not fear.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid,
I'm
do
gonna
not
be with
fear. He was about to engage in a new leadership role in a hostile environment. And God reminded him of his previous encouragements not to fear. That's easier said than done sometimes. Jesus identified himself. Then he said, it is I. Do not be afraid. Now, what's the difference? David, when he's talking in the 23rd Psalm, when he realized Christ was with him all the time, that God was with him all the time. Even when I go through the darkest valley, or the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. There's something about when you realize Jesus is present with you. It gives you a calmness, it gives you reassurance, and it helps you to overcome those things that are, sometimes you can be afraid of them for good reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Scripture doesn't tell us to take foolish chances
No.
or live dangerous or believe we're stronger than any temptation. It doesn't. Satan tempted Jesus. You think he was afraid of Satan? He didn't display it, did he? Confidence that he had in God's word and communication from God led him to make good choices there during that time of the 40 days that he was fasting. Jesus had told him he'd meet him on the other side, didn't he?
You're right.
And they didn't know how he planned getting over there. And we're going to see in this next scripture, after he identifies it, just how they got over there, we don't know.
Yeah, right.
It really doesn't say if wind blew them or what.
Yep.
But sometimes just knowing that God cares about you. And it's the same way when we have somebody that comes to us, JR, and they're afraid that something's going to happen, afraid of this, or afraid of that. If you can reassure them that God's with them, just knowing he cares, it's enough to calm you down sometimes.
Well, even as believers feel, we know that God's with us. But when you get to one of those times where you really need God, sometimes you'll question. You won't question, but sometimes you'll say, all right, now is he really going to take care of me, what I need? And when you get that reassurance that he will, we feel just like they do in these next verses. We just, calm comes over us.
And, you know, even though he doesn't take us, he doesn't want us to take foolish chances
Right.
or live dangerously. Sometimes we can find ourselves in a dangerous situation,
Mm-hmm.
and God takes over.
Yep.
Cheryl's accident a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
They're going down the interstate. She's going 73 miles an hour.
Gets
Has the
run,
cruise control set.
yeah,
Gets hit from behind
gets run over.
hard enough to total out the car.
Yeah.
Debbie says she's just like Mario Andretti there, you know, at the wheel. It's just the calmness that you get, you know,
Yeah.
knowing that Jesus is with you
Yep.
when those things happen. In the next verses, we see that his presence will also see us through.
Yep. And we got one last verse here, and it's a follow-up to 20. It says, then they were willing to take him on board, and at once the boat was at the shore where they were heading. After Jesus revealed himself to him and they realized who he was, then they said, get in the boat with us. I'm sure after Peter got his clothes wet, and they helped Peter back in the boat, and Jesus climbed in the boat with him, and they were willing to take him on board. They initially feared him. First off, they didn't know for sure who he was, thought he was a ghost. But then his voice and his actions, and particularly his actions toward Peter, ensured them of who he was, of the identity of Christ. And then it says in these verses that once Jesus was on board, the wind stopped. Not only did the wind stop, which showed that Christ was in charge of nature, in charge of the ocean, the sea, the wind, and so forth, it said that they were at the shore. They were immediately at the shore where they were heading. I feel that could have been another miracle. We know we had the miracle of the walking on the water. We know Jesus did that. We know we had the miracle. He had the miracle of calming the sea,
Yeah.
and it could have been that their transportation, they were transported to their destination just like that.
Yeah.
The writer says it could be that, or said it could be the fact that the presence of Jesus, despite the long night, and despite their being wore out because they're rowing and so forth and so on, and battling the strong winds and the churning sea, that once Jesus got on board, it was as if the remainder of their journey went without any problems whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it could have been 10 or 15 minutes. It could have been an hour. But yet his presence made everything so calm they didn't notice it, how long it took. Could have been either one of those. Either one of them would be right. It wouldn't make any difference. But it's their reaction to him that calmed everything down. Now, the writer in this, we don't see it in John, but I believe it's in Matthew, said that then those in the boat worshipped him. Truly you are the Son of God, they said. So the disciples kind of alluded to that afternoon when he fed the 5,000, but now this reassured them and cemented the fact that, yes, he was the Son of God, because now nature obeys his rules, obeys his wishes, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, how could they
Huh?
believe less?
Yeah, they'd have to believe more, and even if they didn't believe enough before this, they did now. It says, the writer says that when Jesus entered the boat, the winds died down, the sea became calm. The master of the sea was also the master of disciples. After all, he sent them on this journey, but we also know that he knew he would see them through the journey, and he did, as it turned out. He was one who knew about the storm, but yet he sent them into it. He also knew he had a plan, just like he had a plan to feed the people that afternoon. And when he got in the boat, the sea calmed, and so did their hearts. Just like the disciples, the Lord can calm any fears that we have and help us defeat the storms of life or whatever storms come our way throughout our entire life. And when we realize that and believe that and depend on Him for that, things calm down. Even in the midst of calamity, or even in the midst of, you name it, things calm down for us.
Loss,
Loss.
some people, when they experience loss of a close loved one, or financial loss, or just different things, and they think, how we're gonna make it, and Christ can calm those fears.
You think of all the natural disasters we've had in this area, in the state of Kentucky and North Carolina and so forth in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
When you see your house going down the stream,
Yeah,
and you got to think, what's going to happen to me? How are we going to get through this? But yet, when you start depending on God and realize what He's doing for you, everything calms down. And It's okay. It's okay. We can make it through it. Well, God will get us through it somewhere, by following His plan. He'll get us through it.
sometimes it takes us a while to recognize that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it won't be. It won't be as quick as it was with the disciples, because they didn't have any choice. When Jesus calmed the waters and got in the boat, the problem was over there. All they had to do is either finish rowing up the last little bit, or hang on to the side of the boat and see that motor take off and get them to the shore real quick. Whichever way it was, that's all they had to do. And then it was over. Sometimes calamities or situations last longer than that. But yet we still have a calmness when we depend on God to get us through whatever we have to go through.
So what do we do with this study? Well, consider your storms.
Yeah.
What storms you're going through. Or maybe you've been rowing into a headwind for a long time about something.
Yep.
Consider those things and what troubles there are that's rocking your boat. Think about the way you try to get through them on your own, and pray a prayer to God about that.
Yeah, that's what I like.
And say, Lord, I'm tired of rowing. Sometimes we just have to let go and let God take care of things.
Turn it over to you.
Remind yourself that God's with you. Isaiah 41:10, he says, the writer of the study says, you need to memorize that. And it goes, do not fear, for I'm with you. Do not be afraid, for I'm your God. I'll strengthen you. I'll help you. I'll hold on to you with my righteous right hand, being the all-powerful hand. Take the opportunity to read the other versions of this in the other Gospels. All 4 Gospels bring these different situations into play. Now, all 4 of them don't record this one, but Matthew and I think Mark both do, don't they?
Right.
As well as John. Imagine being in a small vessel in a storm, whipped across the lake. And that's where those boys were at. They were in peril. Jesus, Son of God, comes walking to you on the water. What a sign of who He is. His promise and His compassions don't waver because of difficulty with the weather or difficulty with your situation. He's there for us in whatever situation we find ourselves in. And He truly will calm your doubts and fears. I thank you for joining us this week. I'm glad to bring you this study, and I hope you enjoyed it. Come next week, we'll do another study. We'll talk a little more in John about a man that's blind from birth.
Right.
So I hope you can join us.